because this might be the inner chronicle of what we are, and we have to articulate ourselves, otherwise we would be cows in a field.
Welcome to Cows in the Field. This is a show in which we discuss philosophical themes in popular films. My name is Justin.
I'm Laura.
And today we're going to take a massive syringe filled with green goo and inject it directly into our brain stems. It's time to discuss Re-Animator.
Herbert West is at the top of his class in medical school.
How can you teach such drivel? These people are here to learn, and you're closing their minds before they even have a chance.
He's brilliant, but a little weird.
I've broken the 6 to 12 minute barrier. I've conquered brain death.
His experiments have always been unorthodox.
It was dead.
But lately they're getting out of hand. And he's just made a discovery that could wake up the dead.
Herbert West has affected reanimation in dead animal tissue.
What are you thinking? How do you feel? You?
15 cc's of reagent being administered.
Once you wake up the dead, you've got a real mess on your hands.
And welcoming back to the show, we have Scout Tafoya. Scout is a director, critic, and video essayist, and the editor-in-chief at Ignite Films, which recently released a 4K restoration of the film. Welcome back to the show, Scout.
Thank you so much for having me. A pleasure to be back.
Let's start here with your relationship to the film, Re-Animator, and Stuart Gordon generally. So
I saw Re-Animator. Obviously, this was VHS days still. If I'm not mistaken, this was one that I took out of Island Video, which for a long time was the only reliable video rental store on Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts, where my family liked to go on vacation when I was very young. It was an amazing resource for Grindhouse stuff. They had VHS box sets that were, you know, the kind of thing where just the image on the cover was a movie in and of itself. So you didn't even necessarily have to rent them. And like I of course had a childhood fear of all things with more than 4 legs. And so you would go there and there's all these signs everywhere warning you about ticks because they're all over the island. And then, of course, there on the shelf, front and center, is Tony Randall's 1993 movie Ticks. And I was like, oh, I can't watch this. I'll lose my mind. And then, of course, years later when I did, I was like, oh, this is even more disgusting than I imagined it would be.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, that one's, yeah, Tony really went for it. But all kinds of great firsts at that video store, Hitchcock's and, Michael Ritchie's The Island, which is a very strange movie that I liked a lot. And in amongst those was Re-Animator. And, you know, you kind of get a sense of what it is based on the way that other people talk about it. This was like, you know, when I was first discovering film criticism, which I did mostly through horror writing, like I would read the occasional kind of Entertainment Weekly thing. I remember, I think it was the great Ty Burr did their big glossy 100 best films of all time issue back in the day. He was sort of the spearheading figure behind that. And but horror stuff was what interested me, not least because, as we've said, it's a single image that can really like stay with you in a way, where you see an image from Lawrence of Arabia and it doesn't really tell you anything. You can't get the grandeur of 70 millimeter even on a magazine spread. But if you see the face from The Exorcist or Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you're like, what the fuck is this?
Yes.
And Re-Animator, by virtue of it being so much more a theatrical chamber piece, which of course makes perfect sense when you realize that Stuart Gordon got his start at the Organic Theater Company, a theater company he helped found in Illinois in the late 60s. the more you understand the theatrical roots of the piece, et cetera, et cetera. But before we get further into that, all this to say, I watched it and was just blown away by how great and buoyant and bombastic it was, where, yes, there's gore. Yes, there's, sexuality. Yes, there's zombies. And it comes in this like very sprightly package where it never fully runs out of road on the sort of Bethedic scale, where it's never too much of anything because it's always just enough of everything, where all of that means that everything is too much, but there's still a ceiling on it. It's a real balancing act, and Stuart managed to keep that up for the rest of his very exciting and interesting career.
So was this the first Stuart Gordon film that you saw?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
And then I think my next window into him would have been his first episode of Masters of Horror, Dreams in the Witch House, based on the H.P. Lovecraft story. And because that first season of Masters of Horror was appointment viewing for me that summer. I was a big Don Coscarelli fan because I was a huge Phantasm fan, and it was perfect. It was truly everybody that I wanted to be watching movies by: Tobe Hooper and Joe Dante and John Carpenter. It was like summer camp. It was amazing. Never wanted to leave. Never wanted that show to end. And so, I all that stuff was internalized, and I of course wrote the book on Tobe Hooper, and so. Going back to Stuart's movies was sort of just this like fun dip into a world that was distinct ultimately from the rest of the Masters of Horror in the American canon. He wasn't clinical like David Cronenberg, though of course he's Canadian. He wasn't quite the old-fashioned classical stylist that Tobe Hooper was. He didn't shoot in those beautiful, CinemaScope frames like John Carpenter did. And his political axe to grind was much more built into the personal, whereas Carpenter sort of hints at a cosmic conspiracy against his protagonist. Stuart Gordon was very much about everything is rigged, but the guy next to you is going to be the one who lets you know just how rigged it is. And the best version of that is King of the Ants with George Wendt. That's just a brutal, brutal movie. Like that to me is I have no proof, of course, but it strikes me that like every new French extremist director saw King of the Ants and was like, yeah, that's what we should be doing because this is horrifying. And it's horrifying in a way that is kind of uncommon, even for that era where torture porn was about to hit the scene and blah, blah, blah. But King of the Ants is a really disturbing movie. And just like filled in all the blank spots from there, because at that point I realized that anything that Stuart did was going to not just be exciting and interesting and thought-provoking and disgusting. It was going to be him, Space Truckers, which is his great sort of like comic 90s Dayglow postmodernist comic book. Even that feels very him because it's got this very theatrical approach to gender dynamics and pop cultural isms and everything. It's space as a big shopping mall, which is a very that's an idea out of William Gibson, who was actually going to make that into a sequel to Alien. His script for Alien 3 was set in a mall in space, and
okay,
that's very much what Space Truckers feels like. So it's he was always thinking, he was always trying to do things a little differently, and he was always and none of that. Even when he was working for no money at all, he still had a coherent visual sense and a pretty solid grip on grammar.
I mean, it strikes me that his filmography is fascinating because he seemed to be sort of firmly within the independent scene throughout his entire career. Like he never really had a mainstream. Did he ever have a mainstream hit? So
the closest that we can say that he did, and this, we do have to sort of say that it was his, even if of course he didn't get the credit, was he and Brian Usna wrote Honey, I Shrunk the Kids.
Okay. So yes, of course, that is right. I guess I just mean among the films he directed, but that's right. But that felt like it was like a for hire sort of job. Is that right?
Well, yes and no. They had an office on the Disney lot, the two of them, where they were trying to set up projects and they would be consulted about this or that over the years. And obviously, Brian was using it much more as a shelter for his production shingle, because throughout that period, he not only directed his first two movies, Bride of Re-Animator, the great sequel, and Society, but, he set up The Guyver, which is the great Screaming Mad George directed film, which is sort of like and there's a name for it, but I'm going to forget it. It's the same style and school of Japanese show where it's like the Power Rangers, basically. You're a guy who puts on a suit and becomes a new superhero, basically. There's a term for it that I forget. That I'm not going to try to come up with it because that's going to get me in trouble. So that I think was really the closest thing to a brush with true unbridled success. But of course, it was Joe Johnston who directed it. But even he didn't really reap the whirlwind of that, because while he was able to continue working at a certain budget level, certainly high above the budgets that Stuart was given, he sort of remained an anonymous journeyman. He didn't really become an auteur. He made The Rocketeer, which is one of my favorite Disney movies. And then, things like Jumanji and Jurassic Park 3. But look where we are now. I mean, how many people are going to hold him aloft as their favorite filmmaker? Nothing against him, of course, but that's just sort of the trajectory there. So it's not as though having a sensibility that was able to navigate the kind of, sci-fi tropes of Re-Animator. And obviously both Honey, I Shrunk the Kids and Re-Animator are about science run amok. But being able to make that palatable was Joe Johnston's gift. And Stuart really had no interest in that. Stuart was not going to stop to make sure that you were still with him. He was just going to charge headlong into the obscene, because that was what he made his name doing. To go further back, the theater productions, which is what I had my dear friend and hero Ben Sachs write about for the book, all about Stuart's early theater successes, because Ben is a connoisseur of Chicago theater. He's been going, his entire life. He grew up in Illinois, and his parents were big into going to those productions. I think they even saw one or two of Gordon's productions when he came to Chicago. But it was very much anti-Vietnam War and anti-Nixon economics, and then later anti-Reagan. He was always busy, and he never dulled his perspective to try to reach a wider audience. I mean, what's the I forget who says it, but if they're throwing up, that's like a standing ovation. That's basically the ethos behind so much of Stuart's theater work.
I mean, that makes sense. And that makes sense in his films too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, so how did this, so Ignite Films produces this 4K restoration of Re-Animator. And so how did this come to be? And so you're the editor in chief there, like you're writing the, and compiling the essay collection. How did this come to be? Like, why? And also, why now for Re-Animator? I guess it was the 40th anniversary.
So the 40th anniversary for sure. As happens with every major label of home video stuff, there's a long list and there's a short list of titles that you can pursue based on Re-Animator falling under the auspices of Eagle Rock Pictures, which is what Ignite Films. I hesitate to call him second in command because I don't actually know the hierarchy, but Jim Kwan, who does a lot of work for Ignite, he's an integral part of that company, and he's also a terrific boss. I love him so much. He runs Eagle Rock with a couple of other people, but I think they had like a joint a contract or something like that allowed them to pursue Re-Animator, and it was the 40th, and it was also the kind of thing that we knew we could really go hog wild with the extras, which is of course the appeal of any home video release. Where we started out, I jumped aboard after they had already finalized the first disc for their first release, which was Invaders from Mars by William Cameron Menzies. It was a great movie, and also it gave me an opportunity to take over their website and fill it with content about Invaders from Mars. I wrote this endless sort of biographical sketch that I just kept going week after week because I kept finding new things to write about Menzies' life and career. But I also got like Brendan James, who is the co-host of the Great Blowback podcast, and my friend Willow McClay and Adam Naiman and Roderick Heath, just this murderer's row of critic to come write about Invaders on our website. Then we did a quicker release for William Wellman's Amazing the Story of G.I. Joe, and then Re-Animator was our third. And so I think because the elements were in great shape, there had been a couple of Blu-ray releases of it already, but no 4K. It seemed like somebody was going to do it, and we knew we could do it really well, and we did. It's a gorgeous print, and always with 4K, the trouble is not doing more than the original print can support. I remember going to see a restoration of Black Narcissus, which is one of my favorite films of all time, one of the great films, full stop. And they had corrected it too much to the point where the seams on the studio sets and the matte paintings were starting to show. They were juddery.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, well, this is taking me out of the thing. It's supposed to be fake, but not this fake. Like, I shouldn't be seeing where you were literally linking these two things together. I want to be carried away by the fantasy. Yeah. And Re-Animator is a perfect test case because Mac Ahlberg, the great director of photography, he shot it in this way where, yes, it's expressionistic, but there's a real kind of grim reality to all of those sets, where it feels like the set of a black box theater, but it all has this internal reality because it's also shabby, but it's shabby in a way you believe, as opposed to like, it's just somebody's basement. It's like, no, that's a very specifically set dressed basement. Yeah. There's a difference. And so our people did a wonderful job going in there and really bringing out the color and the sheen of everything, but being very careful to respect the film that had been made. We had Brian Usna in the room with us going over the restoration and, cool. really going through this thing frame by frame to make sure that there was fidelity to the original thing, because I believe Ahlberg is no longer with us. And certainly Stuart passed away, nearly a decade ago at this point. And, with that in mind, what you want to do is to be able to say, who knows what they would have wanted beyond what they gave us. And so you don't want to step out, too far from that. You want to do right by the text, but you also want to make sure that, you're making it the best possible shape for a new generation to rediscover. And in that regard, we also did this, huge box set that comes with all the essays, but also, the little action figure of the Headless Hill with the anatomy doll on his head, which is just such a great,
amazing,
so fucking cool. And it's also great because there are all these, you go back and the history of these is just so much fun too, where the movie is obviously a blast, but it's also great to go back and see that so many people did get it. Pauline Kael's review is justifiably comes up a lot in all of the pieces in the book because it was just so quotable and it was so clear that she had fun with it. And she, almost alone among her peers, understood the reputation of the organic theater when she wrote about it. She's like, well, yeah, of course this movie is what it is. They all came from organic. They were doing, fake blood on stage and nudity on stage back, when those things were still shocking. And, they were talking about the Democratic National Convention riots basically as they were happening. They were completely unafraid of that stuff. So with a little money and a little time, and with Stuart essentially learning how to make a movie on the ground there, he was being taught by his everyday experience how a film would get put together. Barbara Crampton talks about that, where, he would explain what he wanted to Mac Ahlberg, and he goes, well, you can't really do that. He's like, well, why not? It's what I want. He said, well, that's not going to cut together. here's what you do instead. And Stuart being both, a polymath intellectually and artistically, I think he really wanted to just know how things were done, because on the stage, you really can just put somebody there, and that's your stage. Yeah. He never let the impossible get in the way of the right illusion on stage, but also the truth of the stage. And I think he wanted his films to be that same thing. And I think he achieved that. Anyway, so they came to me and said, we're making Re-Animator, what should we do? And I was so happy to have that assignment, because it's a movie I've thought about and seen a million times. I've thought about it a whole lot, not least because I also got really into the career of Brian Usna, who I got to interview in college. We had him call into our film screening society, and he talked me through his entire career, which was just such a delight and just such a great thing that he made time for me. I was 18 or something, and he just called us up on the phone and talked about his misadventures in horror and sci-fi, and he was just so delightful. He still is. He's just got this great kind of like softball coach, vibe to him, and I love him so much. It's in that way where you never expect the people who make the grossest shit to be the nicest people, but it's always true. So at this point, it should be its own kind of trope, which is, the people who seem like they should all be psychopaths running around in, the clothes of their dead mother. They're just very nice people.
The collection of essays too is so lovely too, because it's like you mentioned that a couple of people, like your best friend and like your mentor, like it's like a collection of people you clearly love and like who love this movie as well. It's a very warm booklet of essays.
That's such a lovely thing to hear. I'm so happy. Like truly, that's really all that you can kind of hope for when you put it together, is that everybody's love of the subject comes through, but also hopefully my love of all of the contributors, where I knew every one of those guys and I had a decent relationship with all of them beforehand. And I just feel like this sort of, brings us all a little closer together. But like, when I hit upon the idea that I was like, okay, so Katie Reif doing Barbara Crampton made perfect sense because they had done events together. Katie really understands Barbara and what she has turned her career into. And this really lovely kind of thing where not only did she get her career back, a little later than a lot of actresses are sort of, quote unquote, allowed to, she turned it into this, very, very interesting and profound showcase for what feminism looks like from somebody who had truly been through the kind of the and not to say that these were low profile projects, but rather that she was given kind of short shrift by so much of the film industry, where she was on soap operas and, her first major role in Re-Animator, she's got to be naked on a table for a very long period of that. And people still ask her about it at Q&As. When we premiered this at the Boston Underground Film Festival a couple of months ago, somebody was like, oh, that scene where you're on the table. And she's like, she's in her 60s now and people are still asking. It's like, that's a very uncomfortable thing. And so to still be at the receiving end of a certain degree of leery, fan lust, but while also making the work that means the most to her of anything in her career now, where she's really taking control of that stuff. And Katie, of course, being a programmer and a film critic and somebody who has just lived, like, these two women absolutely understand each other. And I think Katie was able to get, the fullness of Barbara and her career in a really lovely way. And then I've been telling people that getting Alex Kittle to write about Jeffrey Combs, I felt like I was like working for Make-A-Wish, because she loves Jeffrey Combs so much. Like, that's her favorite actor. Re-Animator was the movie that got her into horror. She loves him to pieces. And so, like, not only did we get her to write about him, we also got her to do a pencil sketch of Jeff. And,
I wondered. Okay. Did you see that sketch, Jess?
No, I didn't.
It's very cute.
Oh, it's really good. And so, yeah, that just felt good, and Ben being obviously a Chicago film critic and, a lifelong resident of Illinois, like there was no other choice for that. And then the kind of like wild card thing was like, I know we had practical takes on director, and I wrote about Brian. I love his movies so much. Return of the Living Dead 3 is one of my favorite films. And then we had this kind of extra space. It's like, all right, I want something weird. And I knew in my head, I was like, I should ask Will Sloan to do something. And then it hit me. I was like, oh, necrophilia. Like, it has to be necrophilia. And I went to Will and I was like, okay, I got an idea. The history of necrophilia on film. And it was one of those things where it's almost like the text dots, you see him thinking, while he's typing. And then he goes, I love this idea. It's like, perfect. So
people should check out the set. It's available now. You can buy it. You can buy it anywhere, right? So
you can buy it anywhere.
Yep. So just check it out. 4K remaster of Re-Animator. It comes in. There's both the deluxe edition and then the sort of single a 4K disc edition. And so definitely, folks should check it out. A lot of love went into the production of this, and
absolutely,
there's a ton of bonus features. We watched a couple of them after we rewatched the film, and it was lovely to sort of see like Re-Animator 40 years on, and people looking back in interviews with the cast and crew. It's just really.
I also love that, like, as I found out from that booklet, that that trio of actors are like best friends.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think that's really lovely too.
Yeah.
So I was so happy reading this.
Laura
reading
was
these
very.
essays. I love when actors are friends.
I want to ask now about. I want to ask this question. So this is it's an adaptation of the Lovecraft story Herbert West Re-Animator, and that is generally considered a lesser Lovecraft.
Indeed.
And even Lovecraft himself sort of disparaged it and sort of dismissed it. But I dare say that this is one of the best Lovecraft adaptations as a film.
It is.
And I want to know, like, how is that? Like, why is the film so successful where the story maybe is not?
So, yeah, I mean, to briefly go back, that basically this was written at a time, much in the way that a lot of Dickens can be explained by the fact that he was getting paid per word and per page and all that. Sometimes things go on and on simply because they must. And Herbert West was not anything that Lovecraft took any particular joy coming up with. And, he wrote it because there was demand for that sort of thing. And, he sent him to war, he sent him to the jungle, etc. There was, there are bits of the actual mythos throughout the various Re-Animator stories where, the opening of Bride of Re-Animator, it seems like it's going to be, fairly faithful to a couple of the story pieces, but it's really just sort of an Easter egg. But I think that basically you've hit the nail on the head that it is the best Lovecraft adaptation because it takes away the thing that Lovecraft wasn't very good at, which is plotting. He was, to me, and I love the writing very, very dearly. I know that it's, however you want to describe what Lovecraft was, he was that thing. He was a terrible man. Lucy Sant wrote a great piece about him where she describes him as like part of the appeal of him is that he's a nerd. He loves language and words so much, which is what makes him very appealing to people like me who are just constantly sort of looking to get wrapped up in, not necessarily prose, because I don't even know how well it reads. I remember one time trying to read some of them out loud, and I was like, wow, this is tough. This is borderline gobbledygook. But when it's going into your head via your eyes, it's just gorgeous. It's that the stories are not compelling. It's the ideas that are fascinating because Lovecraft was such a fearful individual, hence his, abject racism. And, he was afraid of dying of 100 different things, and certainly died young, so they were all founded fears. But so how do you adapting Lovecraft is like adapting Fitzgerald. The bare facts of the stories are the least interesting part. It's how he presents those things to you. It's how he conveys information through detail and through suggestion. So I think certainly Stuart Gordon hadn't, and frankly, none of the major contributors. Dennis Paoli, I think, probably had the best sense of who Lovecraft was when they started working on the screenplay. And Stuart was not a fan. He had the story brought to his attention by a friend of his wife's, the great Carolyn, who he interviewed for the disc. And they got together and they read it, and Brian hadn't heard of it either. They had to go to the library, like the restricted section, and find these crumbling manuscripts and, read these things that were, breaking apart in their hands as they were going, and figure out what the bulk of the thing was. Like, all right, so we have a character, we have this sort of insane conception of a world beyond our understanding just through scientific workings. So how do we take those things and make it work? So with 3 writers and Brian as the sort of, overlooking their progress and making sure that it had all of the things that a marketable horror film should have, because he had been working with Charlie and Albert Band at Full Moon, so he very quickly got a crash course in how to market a genre film. And together, the 4 people, they just kept writing back and forth and sending drafts. So you got 3 incredibly smart people. Dennis became a professor of Gothic horror, and Stuart had spent so long in the theater, so that many people attacking the problem of how to take the kernel of a good idea out of a story that is its own worst enemy. That's not a bad way to do it. Add to that the idea that you have to make it for very little money and it has to be compelling on its own terms. Then you've got Re-Animator. And you see that in the 90s, because this kicked off a short-lived wave of intense affection for Lovecraft by way of largely pretty lousy movie adaptations. Because again, people took the stories to heart or the ideas to heart, but there really isn't any way to make that stuff cinematic unless you have millions and millions of dollars to spend. Again, speaking of canceled people, Richard Stanley making Color Out of Space in 2019. My friend John Semley had the best line on it, which was, turns out the color out of space is purple. It's like the things that you imagine versus the things that you're actually having shown to you. That's the trick with Lovecraft. It's like, yeah, you can show people scary monsters or whatever, but it's like, but then you're not really making a Lovecraft story because you have ceased to suggest. And even Shadow over Innsmouth or the Cthulhu stories, there's a fair amount of description that goes into that, but you're still left wondering so much of, what this is. The descriptions of somebody like Wilbur Whately, the Goat Man in the Dunwich Horror, it's like, it's so much cooler if you can't see him, and in nobody's mind was it Dean Stockwell in the Corman adaptation from 1970. It's just, these are things that are so much better left to the imagination. Which is why Herbert West Re-Animator was the perfect subject for that, because nobody reading Herbert West was like, no, he has to be this or that. He fits into the same sort of serialized man of action character that at that point, Doc Savage or Sergeant Rock and his Howling Commandos or, the Edgar Rice Burroughs heroes, or for that matter, Robert E. Howard. There's this kind of like strapping, can do everything. It was just the difference was that Herbert West was dealing with the supernatural in a more Lovecraftian, scientific-y way. But that's the trick of it is you need to be able to show people just enough that they're not wondering why you didn't capture the thing that's really good about the story. It's why, after all these years, everybody talks about the canceled Guillermo del Toro Mountains of Madness adaptation. And it's like, yeah, he probably would have done a fine job. But at the same time, that story is so fucking strange that you really have to invent huge portions of it from whole cloth because it's two people going into a cave and then two people going out of a cave. And it's just what happens between point A and point B. And you really need to be able to carry that for 90 to 120 minutes. And that's your trouble right
Laura,
there.
Same question to you. I mean, how do you feel like the movie succeeds in a way where the story doesn't? I mean, maybe you think the story does succeed. I actually I reread it, and I think
I'm going to admit to you, I was doing my other homework, Justin. I didn't finish.
I reread it,
story.
and it suffers on account of it being serialized. So it's in six parts. So there's this sort of strange thing where it has to recap itself periodically, and it is in this sort of, it jumps ahead in time, and each segment has to be quite condensed. I didn't find it horrible or anything, but there's a massive difference in the tone of this film and Lovecraft.
Yes. Yeah. You mean that Lovecraft is not super duper funny?
Yeah.
No, I don't think H.P. Lovecraft heard, let alone laughed at a joke in his entire life.
Exactly. Well, there's a couple different things. So there's one is there's the humor, and then the other is there's this sort of the sexualization that's like just totally infused in this film in sort of two dimensions, both, and we could talk about both dimensions, but one is the sexualization of Barbara Crampton's character, obviously overtly, especially by the sort of evil, lecherous Dr. Hill, the egomaniacal med school doctor teacher who's trying to steal his students' ideas, and has the most amazing office of all time, which we'll come back to in a second. Yeah. But then there's also the sort of sexual, sexual undercurrents of the relationship between Herbert West and Dan Kane, the two male leads. which has been written about a little bit online, and I was excited to see that because I had thought a little bit about this, and then I read there was this blog post by someone named Dr. Worm. And I guess this is sort of it was cited in a couple things I was just poking around on.
Dr. Worm was cited?
Yeah, Dr. Worm was cited. So I
Awesome.
checked out the blog post.
Awesome.
And
Okay.
it's quite interesting, but they were citing this this thing from, so they were thinking that this is an old trope that goes back to the kind of, Frankenstein and all this, where it's often two men,
Mm-hmm.
The scientist and the assistant, both men,
Mm-hmm.
who are, locked away, hidden away, and they're trying to procreate without women. This idea that like we need to create life or recreate it in the case of the two men, without the women. So this writing out the women, and you see this in the film. When you bring this up, you realize, yeah, there's a love triangle set up between Kane, West, and Megan, the character played by Barbara Crampton. And they're periodically, the way they're staged, it's set like, Dan in the middle, and then these two like polar things pulling in opposite directions. The woman promising a kind of domestic tranquility or whatever, heterosexual tranquility of like, yeah, marry the dean's daughter and live a life of relative ease. And then you have Herbert West, who promises what? What does he promise? He promises like greatness, the strive of overcoming everlasting life. But not just that, but there's a certain degree of egoism, right?
Yeah.
Like egotism, like we will together, like, transcend death.
Yeah.
And
but it's like, yeah, like creation and procreation are like they're the two. That's the things that these two people are offering him in very
various
different ways.
Yeah. And apparently, so it is interesting to think that this is like an old trope or something. It goes back to Frankenstein and so on. But it's here in the film, sort of subtly. I don't know how intentional this is in the film, but it is there. And I do think like none of that is in. Well, it's in the Lovecraft insofar as the main character, the character is writing is the Dan Kane character. But he doesn't write with the kind of like sexual longing that you kind of get here with the characters. He just writes like he's sort of caught up with this guy, like he's kind of a true believer in a way of Herbert West. So certainly Lovecraft's sex was not a part of a lot of Lovecraft stories. So this is another thing that Gordon is injecting into it.
Yeah. I had been thinking about a parallel with Watson and Sherlock Holmes, which I don't know enough about like that, if there's like any, queer readings of that. But I just,
there are indeed.
I would imagine there would be, but the allure of genius too. I think like you understand why Watson like follows Sherlock Holmes to the end. He'll do anything for him. And similarly, I think it's very clear, sexual or not, for their relationship, because I think Herbert West in this viewing or in this movie is very asexual. It's like maybe Dan is attracted to Herbert West. Herbert West is just attracted to the work and creation and like what he's doing. But the way that it's played and the chemistry those two actors have, you understand why he would like follow this batshit crazy guy down any path he would possibly take.
Yeah.
Well, it's also funnily the role that Herbert West comes to take in Dan's life is essentially the thing that neither of them get from Dr. Hill, which is professorial enthusiasm and engagement. If
you were not engaged by that Q-tip lecture,
that's right. It's a shade off of Clint Eastwood in the Iger Sanction, talking about how nobody is destined for greatness. But it's what both of them want is it's what's missing from their study, more or less, is permission to keep going. It's not even necessarily that like Herbert's ideas are crazy. It's that the form that they take is so insane because at no point does anybody say, you're onto something, let me help you. These are all things that he has to do in secret in the tradition of all best mad scientists. I mean, going back obviously to Mary Shelley, so much of that story is wrapped up in, her feelings of inadequacy in front of her husband and his poet friends who lock themselves away and are treated as geniuses while she's left on the outside of that thing. And then they go so far as to try to make another woman in there while she's waiting for him to come to her marriage bed. It's this bonding experience, but it's also like constantly looking around for reinforcement of status quo or just enough outside of it, but still being told to do it. The thing that everybody wants here is some version of keep going, you're on to something. And that's what Dan and Herbert give to each other. Whereas Megan never really talks about his career at all. The Dean doesn't care about how intelligent either of them are. He hears that they're doing things outside of, who's ever purview and decides to shut them down.
He's like, not with my microscopes, you're not.
Exactly, you're right. Those are my test tubes. Because there's an orthodoxy in place, and it's a very Victorian orthodoxy. Yes. So it comes from, the days of Lovecraft and Mary Shelley, but just carried to that wonderful, gory extreme, because by the time they were able to make the movie, they could actually show you those things.
That's right. Well, I mean, it is interesting that the objections, that the only voice who objects morally to what they're doing is Megan. I mean, the rest of them, the Dean objects on the grounds that, well, that's impossible. And look, we're going to get in trouble and I'll lose this grant. And I think it is kind of funny how there's this extended dinner scene where they're just like, oh, you're the best, Dr. Hill, you bring in the big grants and stuff. And,
our grant machine.
And in light of the current situation, now where everybody knows about the dependency of universities and medical schools on grants, one can have a sympathetic ear to Dean Cain here.
Yeah.
But
you say Dean's the hero is what you're thinking?
No. Or Dean Halsey, excuse me. Dean Halsey, sorry.
Yeah, Dean Cain was Superman.
That's
right. Dean Halsey.
But at the same time, so he thinks this is like uncouth and impossible. So that's why he discards it. But the men themselves are like, I mean, this is amazing. Like this, we've reanimated a cat. Like let's keep going. Like let's do this. And I do think it is interesting that like the moral problem at the core of what they're doing is never really explored. I mean, of course, Megan does say like what, this is kind of fucked up. But there is an issue here of consent. If you're dead, you cannot consent. You can't consent to whatever is being done to you, including you being brought back to life. And none of these, all of the things that are brought back to life end up doing terrible things. They seem to be in agony. They seem to be suffering. They seem to be acting, in many cases, like in the case of the Dr. Halsey, Dean Halsey. When he gets brought back to life, he becomes like, a shell of himself. Like, I mean, he's eventually lobotomized and mind controlled or whatever. But like, even at the beginning, he can't control himself. And it is interesting that moral thing is not that explored. And then in the end, the final thing is Mr. Cain reanimating without consent his girlfriend. And the last thing we get is a cut to black and her screaming. And I do think like there is like a kind of a way of thinking of the sort of arc of these characters where Herbert West, definitely not a hero. Of course, he's better than Dr. Hill, is clearly the villain in this film. But Herbert West is kind of like the poisonous, he's like the snake in the Garden of Eden. He comes and he gives the knowledge and it poisons, it corrupts Cain. And in the end, he does something that I think of as actually quite evil, because what we're led to see is like these people come back and they're not who they were before they died. That actually is a kind of selfish, and because of course he's doing it, punishment or torture in a way of another human
and it's
being.
Also confirmation essentially of what West and Hill in their way basically already believe of everyone anyway, that there really is only room for people in the upper echelon of the scientific community who are geniuses or are on their way to be geniuses. So you take away people's brain power in the pursuit of greatness, then really all you're going to be left with is people who you must view as inferior. There is just a hint of fascism to their version of discovery. And in Hill's case, I think it's quite obviously planted there, where he's got this sort of Aryan Svengali thing to him, and West is so much more troubled, quite obviously disturbed, based on the way that Jeffrey Combs so memorably plays him, that there's more at work. But I think also West is defined by the things he hasn't thought of, which I find fascinating. Is all the way through, he's like great guns, full steam ahead on all these things, not considering what the outcome at any given moment could be, except the best possible version of it.
Yes.
And his pragmatism is so winning and so charming that you do just want to keep seeing him go. Totally. Even though everything he does fails, and yet you want to keep seeing him do it.
That's true. And that is credit to Jeffrey Combs' performance. Like, he is so fun in this movie, and just such a charming.
They're just not fresh enough.
Yeah, I know.
Then we're gonna see, how cool it is.
I think in my first review of this movie, I was like, he's the world's worst roommate. Like, he comes in, I think he kills the cat and then reanimates it.
Definitely kills the cat.
And then, basically like gets you kicked out of med school and stuff. But he's super charming, and you're just like, oh shucks, Herbert West, here you go again.
It's very true.
Herbert. You want to make a sitcom of it where they're just like roommates getting into shenanigans?
That's right. It's the bit from The Critic where what is it? Honey, I Ate the Kids with Hannibal Lecter.
We can defeat death. We can achieve every doctor's dream. You'll be famous and live lifetimes.
Here's another aspect of the film that I found kind of weird, and I guess this is in the story a little bit, but so there's the whole, reanimating corpses. All right, that's great. So these corpses come back, and there's this undertone of like, okay, we're materialists, right? All we are, there's no soul. All we are is just the material, which might, the brain and the kind of chemical reaction. So presumably, if like that stopped, we could just restart it. Right, that's West's hypothesis, and then Dr. Hill is reanimated as a severed head. So basically, he's like gonna steal West's stuff and his inventions and all that, and West, knocks him out and then decapitates him, and then takes the head and decides, I'm gonna reanimate this head and see what happens. And then I'm going to reanimate the body. And somehow the head and the body can
work
communicate.
Together. They work great together.
Work great. They're a great team. But then not only that, the head seems to, through this guy's experimental lobotomy that he's been doing on various people, including the Dr. Hill. Dr. Halsey. The names, I'm all fucking confused. Dean Halsey. He can now like mind control reanimated corpses, so he has
so that whole section was part of an early draft that was then cut out. In the longer cut of the film, there's a scene where Hill hypnotizes both Kane and Megan and the Dean. And so that was ultimately left out of the release version because the main creatives essentially agreed that it didn't add enough to the story to give this character even more reason to be evil and, this other unexplainable superpower thing. It was just sort of adding to the melange of cosmic wrong of the piece. But it does help you get all the way there when he's reanimating corpses in the morgue at the end of the thing, and they're all doing his bidding. Or I guess you could say in a way that they're not really doing anyone's bidding; they're just going nuts.
That's true.
Just there to party.
But he does. It's true. They are there to.
Is he like he's the only one who gets reanimated who like seemingly has full faculties?
He seems to have exactly.
Because everybody else like looks like he said at one point Herbert West says like zombies. Burn is always painful or like babies. Yeah. Like they don't have like full control of their body. They're just reflexes and like in emotion. clearly I'm thinking about my child development class.
Yeah.
But like like they can't like walk and stuff.
Yeah.
You know, but like this guy, he's totally there. He's himself and his body's walking around, no head, just like
Doing his bidding.
just
He gave him the right dose.
graceful as you please. Yeah.
I love that though. I mean, there is this thing because he's doing these lobotomies on them, and he's going to do it on Herbert West at one point. He's got Herbert West strapped down to the gurney, and he's drilling into whatever, doing laser drill into his head. So I think this is supposed to be suggested somehow the lobotomy like allows him to telepathically sort of like, you know, control you or whatever. And anyway, I think it's great. I think it's like it's such a swerve, and
I needed no explanation.
I need no explanation.
Don't care.
I
think is the secret to that movie's success is that it's so outrageous and yet it's so vibrant and just has such great pace, and every character is memorable and weird in the right way, and everybody's really going for it, and it just works, and you're just moving along. And as you say, you don't really have questions at all. It's
no questions, no notes.
No questions, no notes. No. If this movie, let me just bitch about for something. If this movie's made today, they would have to be like have like a 20-minute exegesis about what the hell's going on and how the microphysics of lobotomy works and stuff. This movie's like just like, no. Who cares?
I think the essay on Jeffrey Combs' performance talked about like, there's no reason why Herbert West wants to do what he does. He just wants to.
He just is. It's you're
just
right.
what he does.
Alex hit that in the nail on the head there. And it's just so perfect because, why, I think a good new version of this, but even still, to your point, Justin, that like you would need more reason behind everything. The movie Rebirth with Marin Ireland, who does a wonderful job, again, just sort of pressing this steadfastness of purpose and intellect forward, that it doesn't really matter, why she wound up in this situation. She just knows that she has to keep going.
Yeah.
There is more backstory in that movie, lots more, which I think speaks to this current moment. But, that's really what you want, is just like, I don't care. Things just are. They simply are. We don't ever learn, for instance, where the creature from the Black Lagoon came from. He simply is. And there is just such a purity to that.
It's also scarier. So there's a final, one of the near final shots of this film is, Dr. Hill's body has split open, and I guess his intestines, I don't know what, they're massive, have decided to wrap themselves around Herbert West's.
Your intestines are really long, by the way.
Okay, but these are like thick-ass intestines.
Okay.
They're wrapped around Herbert West's body like possession style, right?
Yeah.
And they're like pulling him into some sort of like void into his body. And, they're holding hands. West and Kane are sort of holding hands for a moment as he's being pulled away. And I don't want an explanation of it, because as soon as you start to tell me like, and then, and then the agent, if you do too much of it, it makes your intestines go crazy too. No. I want there to be smoke and flashing lights and weird ass intestines. It's way scarier that way.
Yeah.
And how beautiful is that sequence? All of that great Mac Wahlberg lighting and the fog and the smoke and everything. I was like, oh man, it's just beautiful.
So cool.
That, you would see in the entirety of that room at various points throughout that movie. And yet when the lights turn off, it's a completely new environment. And again, you don't have any questions. You're just suddenly in this new, expressionist version of whatever. And it's just wonderful.
So good. This film is stock full of practical effects. Really simple in-camera practical effects. Do you guys have a favorite of those? I feel like there's a ton of really fun ones, but
I like all head and body stuff. Like,
the
especially when he's holding it in his tummy and it's really clear that it's just like the actor poking through, and then like a giant like the I don't know, paper mache body on top of it or something. But like
it might just be another. Do you know if it's another guy, just another person over top, like crouched, and then him?
Maybe. I don't. Sometimes it just felt like he was poking himself through like a frame. But
I think there's a behind the scenes shot.
There's a picture.
Where there's it's like a paper mache body and a person behind it holding, and then him.
It's not his hands and it's the actor's head. Yeah. I was trying to pinpoint, I was like, why do I feel like head body disconnect, but somehow communicating with each other is like something that I find really funny and I've seen a lot of. I feel like there's a children's movie. It was like Casper or something. I don't know. I can't pull it from my memory, but there was something that like I watched as a kid that I thought was really funny. And I just think it's funny when a head and a body are separated, but are still working together. I think that's great. I like all of those.
There's a bit of Evil Dead 2 in that as well, you know, the headless girlfriend, but also the hand on the loose and everything, you know, it's just good fun.
Yeah. And I think, like it looks really corny at times, but like in ways in an awesome way.
Yeah. Very charming.
Scout, do you have a favorite of the practical effects of the film? I mean, pretty much everything is practical, so.
All of it's practical.
Yeah, it's all practical. So,
you know, there aren't any even like, you know, there's no processing or rear projection or anything either, because they weren't thinking on those terms. It's all about what you could actually make work in the room.
Yeah.
I do like the intestine thing because it's the only real sop to what we think of as the dominant Lovecraftian image, which is the tentacular.
Tentacles.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Tentacular. I like that.
And I love that even before it was broadly understood what those things looked like. And certainly this is a revisionist Lovecraft adaptation with much more personality from the three writers and Brian as producer, and those actors definitely, you know, they still managed to be like, yes, this is the Lovecraft thing. Tentacles are the Lovecraft thing. We have to have them in there. You know, I was like, that's brilliant. And of course, that then works its way into other movies that are Lovecraft, but not Lovecraft. Things like Hellboy, which is, I don't know, probably Guillermo del Toro's best movie. Who knows? But there's so much great Lovecrafty stuff in there, which again has that same, you know, very, very carefully constructed tone where there's darkness, but it's not too dark. There's comedy, but it's not a full-on comedy. You know, these are films made in the vein of Re-Animator, and it's a tough row to hoe. But, you know, I like seeing people do that. And I think a lot of that is exactly that scene where it's like, yeah, it's a disgusting idea. It's truly gross and weird and inexplicable. But, you know, being choked to death by somebody's intestines is like, yeah, that's just so wonderfully crazy that you can't help but love it. I love them getting attacked by the puppet cat.
The cat is so funny.
Yeah, where it's just attached to his back.
Yeah.
They just put a cat, you know, like a fake cat on his back, and he runs around.
It runs around. It's so funny. That scene, I don't know how many times they rehearsed it, and like the choreography required, and like all the like you talked about that basement being like a dressed basement, a perfectly like I loved that basement space and how much you got to like see the weird corners of it in that scene.
And the great decision, you know, to have the light swinging throughout that sequence so that you can't ever get a true purchase visually on what it is that you're looking at. And then, you know, just David Gale as the severed head is just a fucking wonderful performance. It's just so funny. It's almost like Monty Python-esque or something, you know, just the slow speed at which it takes him to get all of his words out initially and everything. It's wonderful because it's like, yeah, what would the severed head sound like? And they gave it just enough thought that it's sort of credible, even though it's cartoonish. And, you know, I think
when
about,
he gets his little blood bath and he's like,
yes. Look with the plasma thing. And like, that's an image right out of, as Will says, The Brain That Wouldn't Die, which is a Mystery Science Theater classic, of course, another independent horror film. And, but it also reminds me of a great bit. Bob and Ray was this radio program, I think on NBC Radio in the 60s. And they just lasted it well into the 80s until Ray Goulding died in, I think, 1989. But they had a bit that they used to do, one of these things. It was like their Who's On First, but it was called the Slow Talkers of America. And it was just somebody taking forever to get through a sentence as the other a person interviewing them gets increasingly fed up with the speed at which they're doing everything. So I was reminded of that during David Gale's performance as the severed head. I love that.
About the head, my favorite thing is where it's the simplest trick. It's an edit. So they have the shot of the head being held, obviously just neck up so that the actor David Gale can perform. And then cut to behind the head, someone holding the head, just a fake head, obviously.
Yeah.
That is seamless. It's totally believable. And that's the simplest thing, you know, the simplest practical effect. It's a cut, but you just buy it 100, you know. And I think that's the kind of stuff that I just think let's have more of that. Like, that's so easy to do. And you don't need a $10 million CGI budget or whatever to pull that off. You could just do it with cuts, strategic cuts.
Do it Texas switch whenever you can.
Yeah,
I was watching the movie Wreck the other day, which has one of my favorite horror edits of all time, where they're in the lobby, somebody falls from the 5th floor, and so I to this day I don't really know how they do it, but it's guy falls down the thing, and it's clearly either a CGI blur or it's a dummy. And then the camera rushes over to see the actor on the ground bleeding from the head. I was like, God damn, that's great.
Yeah.
That is excellent effects work. And I just, I've seen this movie enough times that I was willing to take myself out of it to think of it. But the first time I saw it, I was just like, holy shit.
They just dropped a dude.
Yeah, they just dropped it. It was amazing. I was like, how the fuck do you do that?
That's the
and
thing.
Even now, I don't really know.
That's the genius of those found footage films, is that they have to do that, but make it look improvised. That's so hard to do. And that's so underappreciated in that genre of like, make something that they've choreographed and they've all planned it out, but just make it look like it was just suddenly happening in that moment. That is really, really special. Yeah, we should rewatch Wreck. I love that movie.
On the list. Yeah, we have that. Remember how weirdly hard it was?
It was extremely hard for a long time
in Espanol.
Yeah, we
like,
couldn't get. There was only
There was
only the dub version online.
Pathetic.
Yeah, and so we had to get a DVD copy.
Did I get it from my beloved Movie Trading Co?
You got it from Movie Trading
in
Co.
Dallas, Texas.
Yeah,
I hope they're still there. Beloved Movie Trading Co. We love you.
Okay, so
I think Rex on Tubi if you guys are impatient. But,
there we go.
Yeah.
Tubi.
The people's streaming service.
So last thing I just wanted, Dr. Hill's office, obviously, most teaching medical doctors have an office that's full of all the usual things. They've got a mini fridge full of blood.
Yep.
Of course. They've got a two-way mirror that looks into a padded cell
for their lobotomized patients.
Yep.
Which, by the way, also like, is there another direction that you can come in? Because at one point he leaves his office and then like 2 orderlies walk in with him.
Yeah. There's like another.
So there's another
waiting
way.
room.
He's got a full hallway that goes around the fucking the little
so he
padded
can be like,
cell.
Okay, then he can just like intercom Jim and be like, can you just like tackle my lobotomy patient real quick? Okay, cool. So that
it's awesome. It's truly awesome.
Like a really wonderful model of the head, brain, eye socket.
Yes, you've got to have the model head, which is Chekhov's model head, because it's coming back. It is fully coming back, and it's going to be.
I do
used
like too that
he's
like, what I want to do is I'm going to come in through the eye, and she's like, yeah, I don't want to know any of this. Nope. That's a pass.
It's so awesome. It's like that is the kind of grotesque domination that character is just so clearly getting off on. I was like, let me explain to you exactly what I'm going to do to ruin your life.
Yeah.
Like, it's just so thoughtless and horrible. And Dave Gale is so good at just like this lurching, horrible, lugubrious, sadistic descriptions of the nightmare that is the human body. But it's also, to Ben's point in his essay about Stuart's theater roots, the reason that, more than anything, the padded room is visible from the office is because Stuart was thinking like a theater director. If you were watching it on stage, you had to be able to see everything.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. Then now you just have one set. You don't need to have like, oh, now you go down a hall and this and that. No, it makes perfect sense, like from like a practical standpoint of making the film. It just, in the story of the film, you're like, wait a second, what the fuck? But I love that,
this Katani has got some weird stuff going on, but I love it.
You have to kind of put a little effort to recognize that. And you know what?
Yep.
If you're just watching the film, it just goes down totally smooth.
Yeah.
The other thing that goes down smooth is in the back of this dude's office, there are trophies.
Yeah, they look like kids trophies, like when you do
softball.
Like softball, martial arts, whatever you got with the little gold guy like kicking a ball. Do those trophies get thrown at some point when like maybe?
Oh yeah, maybe.
I feel like they're getting tossed at some point in the room. And also, let's also not forget that he's got his file cabinet, which has some really important medical files and just like the hair.
Yeah, he's got
of his would-be girlfriend.
Yeah, he's gotten the file on Megan Halsey, his friend and colleague's daughter. that he's got all the newspaper clippings of her hair.
Yeah, he's been lusting after her from before that was legal.
Yeah, exactly. And like also he's just keeping it right there in the unlocked file, just right drawer right there. You know, I love it.
Right.
Like it's great.
Best office ever. I'm taking notes for my home office, my working space.
Of course.
Yes. We're going to need at some point when one of us goes crazy, we're going to need
a two-way mirror.
Yeah, we're going to need the padded room.
Which one of us is going crazy?
We'll see.
No, really. Who do you think it's going to be?
No, really.
No, really. On mic, Justin, who's going crazy?
Who's going crazy?
It's the question is who's going crazy first. That's the real question. Scout, we didn't talk at all about the score, but like, what do you have any views on the score? You know, like
it's one of my favorite 80s scores. I mean, not even just horror. I just think Richard Band really went above and beyond. You know, Richard's music is always great. There's a kind of a surrealist, like, you know, he you know, what they call this in film scoring world, and I'm sure I'm not telling you guys anything you don't know, but just for the listeners' sake, you know, they call when the music deliberately matches the actions of the characters, they call that Mickey Mousing. And
did not know
Richard.
That. We didn't know that.
Well, there you go. Richard Band was really good at that. And that obviously, you know, you put it in cartoonish terms or whatever, you're making it sound like it's not an important skill. But Richard was one of the masters of that. And he was doing it on a synthesizer, which was fairly new technology at the time. Obviously, like, you know, Kraftwerk and Wendy Carlos had kind of, you know, put that into everybody's consciousness through both their, you know, studio albums, but also through the Shining score.
Mm-hmm.
And Richard took this, you know, fairly new way to communicate and made it into his own thing fairly quickly. He really like kind of changed what horror scores sound like very, you know, with only a couple of years. But the score for Re-Animator was done with an orchestra in Rome. There's these great pictures. This was the best, you know, my favorite find, I think, of all of the retrospective photos, the archival photos that we got for the booklet are the pictures of the recording studios in Rome. I got to speak to Richard for a couple of minutes, which was a great joy, just because I've been listening to his music for, you know, as long as I've been watching movies, from all of his Full Moon stuff. But like the theme music is one of the great new wave songs. It's Oingo Boingo could have written that song, or, you know, it's just so much fun. And it's, you know, every little piece of it is wonderful, where the individual instrumental performances are so clearly good. And there's just enough wonkiness with the time signature that you're like, oh, real human beings were playing these things. It is not just, you know, the transposition of electronic timing or anything. It's, you know, those guys are really trying to keep up with Richard's design. And, you know, he takes the Bernard Herrmann score, and this was obviously pre-Paul's Boutique, so the rights questions weren't as big a deal. And Herrmann, I believe, was already dead by that point, because I think he died shortly after Taxi Driver came out, because I think that was his last score. Or if it wasn't, it was his penultimate score. But you know, it's just a great little thing where you're like, again, it's the perfect intro to the movie, because you've just seen the great, you know, the doctor exploding in the Swiss hospital, and Herbert's amazing line to start us off: "I didn't kill him, I gave him life," and then this jaunty, lovely, lush score takes place. And Richard said that he was trying to deliberately write it in this kind of 1920s idiom, where it was like, yeah, what would this character, if he were alive back when the book was written, what would be the music that he would have been hearing? And so there's just like a little bit of, you know, jazzy improvisation in there, but you know, it's kind of this chamber orchestra vibe, where it's the kind of thing that like you would have experienced if, like Herbert West, you had gotten done on the German front and gone to hang out in a bar at the start of the Weimar, you know, era or whatever. And that's a very cozy description of it, but that's, you know, I just think he did a wonderful job. And the whole way through, if once more you move from the opening credits to the closing credits and you don't have a million questions, part of that success is Richard's music, because it truly allows you to just keep going with the propulsive feel of the piece.
I don't have much to say on it. I thought it was great. I was just, we were trying to figure out which is it Psycho he's riffing
Psycho,
off of?
It's Psycho.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
we were like, which Herrmann
it's like
score
when, and Is that when it really is it really popping off in Psycho when she's driving away, when she starts to drive towards the base motel?
Yes. It's the opening.
When she's in the rainstorm.
Yeah, the opening.
The rainstorm.
Sure, yeah.
The rainstorm. Dun, 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 dun. Yeah, okay.
And it's
at first I was like, Vertigo? No, it's not Vertigo. But we got Vertigo. It quickly. It's Psycho. Yeah.
It's if you want Vertigo needlessly repurposed, you can watch The Substance, where it makes a completely inexplicable appearance at the end of that movie.
Oh, I didn't even catch that.
I did not either.
God. Yeah, because it doesn't make any fucking sense. It's you know that story about Aboriginals looking at pictures of themselves and not knowing what they're looking at. If you're watching The Substance and you're hearing the Vertigo score, I think your brain is telling you, I can't be hearing the Vertigo score. What the fuck is this doing here? This doesn't belong here. This movie has nothing to do with Vertigo.
I know. That's true. So I guess my brain just filtered it out. It was like, can't process that.
Yeah,
next.
That's not happening. Scout, thank you so much for being here. And tell the listeners at home, so, you have a Patreon, and where they can find the Patreon, where they can find your writing, and where they can find and read you on social media.
Yes. So I'm on Twitter and Blue Sky, at @HonorZombie, @_HonorZombie, and patreon.com/HonorZombie. I have a column still for RogerEbert.com called The Unloved, first of the month. We take a movie that deserves a second look for this or that reason that was, written off at the time of its original release. The most recent one was Tarsem's Immortals, a real vulgar classic, a real favorite around these parts. I have books you can buy. I wrote the first basically comprehensive English language study of Toby Hooper called Cinemophagy. I wrote a book on John Ford called But God Made Him a Poet. And most recently, I self-published an Anthony Mann reader called The Black Book, which was, I realized I had enough writing on every single Anthony Mann movie to put together a little volume just kind of for fun, without bothering my people who run real presses. I was very fortunate that the people who put out my first two books, Nell Minnow's Miniver Press and John Nix's with an X, they really took so much time and heart and effort and really made those books, the wonderful things that they are. And I was like, I don't want to waste their time with this. I'm just going to do this thing for fun. So yeah, my Anthony Mann book is out there now. So please pick that up. Go to the Patreon, a new video essay and 2 written pieces every week. And, previews of some of my Blu-ray content and things like that. I just got my hands on the Blu-ray of The Dark Half, put out by Vinegar Syndrome, a really, really beautiful edition. Holy Moses, it is so gorgeous. And I'm on there with Daniel Krauss, who has been a very generous donor to my Patreon. He's a great horror writer, and he was friends with George Romero when he was still alive. And they wrote some books together. So being there with Dan was a big thrill for me. I really loved being able to flip that book open and see his name and then mine. That's just very, very cool for me. And Dan's movie Whalefall is being made into a movie his novel Whalefall is being made into a movie as we speak. So look out for that. Wow. Brian Grazer bought it a little while ago. I think they're about to start shooting.
And you also are a filmmaker.
I am also a filmmaker. You can find my work online. Just for no particular reason, I put my movie Under Me You, which is a sort of a kind of a bachelorette party movie, on YouTube. And I think because bots found it, it had like 24,000 views in the first week or something like that. I was like, what the fuck is awesome. Going on here? But I am proud of that movie. I think it's good. And, I like, you can find, I've made a couple of horror movies, a couple of sci-fi movies, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, if you ever wanted to talk about those, I'd love to talk to whomever about that. So find me and email me. I'm out there. I'm willing to talk about that. And if you want to write about them, I'll give them to you for free, et cetera.
How do you find the movies though? Like, do you have a website or how? Can you rent them?
Most of them are on Vimeo on demand, but also if you join my Patreon, they're all also there. So for the low cost of $5 a month, you can watch every movie that I've made. And at this point, the number I think is like 33. So yeah, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of stuff. You'll never run out of content.
You're a busy guy.
Yeah, check it out, guys.
Can I just also say, for when Scout comes back, fingers crossed for number 3, we need to have a severed head movie. every movie that we've had so far, that we've covered so far together, has prominently featured a severed head.
Right. So we previously had you on for Alien Romulus.
Mhm.
There was this. What? Oh yes, that's right. The AI generated severed head.
A severed head.
Is there a severed head in Texas Chainsaw? Oh no, what was to Toby Hooper that you had recommended? Last time we had you on, we were going to have you back for Toby Hooper because of the book. But then I bumped this because this came out and I was like, oh, I want to talk to Scout about Re-Animator. But is there a Toby Hooper that has a severed head?
I mean, I would prefer the head to be talking, but I'll allow it. But
I'm trying to think if there's a severed head. Poltergeist doesn't have the severed head. It has the head that melts. The guy pulls his own face apart.
That's pretty scary.
That does sound cool.
That's pretty scary.
Maybe I'll allow
very
it.
Dope.
I don't know. I'm just putting it out there.
Yeah.
Talking severed heads are our thing.
There's a fair amount of, there's a corpse puppet in Texas Chainsaw 2.
Corpse puppets. I
There's a
haven't seen
corpse
Texas
puppet.
Chainsaw 2. We should watch that.
Oh, it's good. It's real good.
Nice.
It's got a lot in common with Re-Animator. They got a similar kind of a tone.
Very good.
Okay.
Yeah. That might be.
Anyway, food for thought.
Food for
we don't
thought.
have to figure it out
Something
tonight.
to think about.
Yeah.
You guys, go watch some Toby Hooper. You won't be disappointed. I recommend Night Terrors and The Mangler. Those are both great movies that nobody talks about.
Cool. All right, maybe we'll have you back for one of those then. Thanks
Please,
so much, Scout.
happy to do it. Thank you so much, Gil. I'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you
This is
soon.
a
Bye.
blast.
All right, guys. It's Justin here doing the outro a few weeks after we recorded this fun episode with Scout. And I just wanted to let you know that in 2 weeks, we'll be doing a second Lovecraft adaptation, In the Mouth of Madness, with returning guest Carly Severn. So check that out in 2 weeks. And then also just got to plug all our socials because that's what you're supposed to do when you have a podcast. So we are at CowsPod on all the different sites, Blue Sky, Twitter, Instagram. You can find us on the web at cowspod.com. We've got merch and some cool stuff too. Knitted hats with cows on them. We got cow shirts. We got shirts with Herzog quotes. So you can go to shop.cowspod.com to get some merch. And we'll see you in 2 weeks. Okay, bye.